Two animals, soaked and unmoving, lay beside the backyard pool. One was a small golden retriever, his chest heaving, coughing violently as water spilled from his muzzle. Beside him, a bobcat, his golden brown fur matted and heavy with water, trembled, in silence. They lay side by side, their bodies still, the aftermath of something harrowing and unseen. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like a tragic end, but hidden in the details was a story few would believe. Why was a wild bobcat next to a family dog? Why were both drenched and gasping beside a private suburban pool? And most haunting of all, how had they ended up there, together? It didn't make sense. Bobcats are solitary predators, fierce, elusive, territorial. They don't play with dogs, they don't jump into water, let alone risk their lives to save another creature. And yet that's exactly what Rusty did. He dove into a pool to save a puppy who wasn't even his kind. The questions were endless, and to find the answers, we have to go back 6 months earlier to a quiet suburb in Maple Hills, where the Williams family had just moved into a modest home tucked between aging trees and forgotten fences. The house had character. Built in the 90s, it came with creaky floorboards, ivy-covered bricks, and a backyard pool that hadn't seen use in years. Martha had recently retired from teaching elementary school. Her husband Robert, a former civil engineer, had hung up his drafting tools 6 months prior. The couple envisioned quiet mornings, gardening projects, and afternoon walks with their new companion, Scout, a golden retriever puppy gifted to them by their daughter before she moved out of state. Scout was full of joy, all floppy ears and boundless energy. With fur like spun gold and eyes that mirrored the sky, he brought warmth into the Williams' quiet routines. But what the couple didn't know, what no real estate agent could have warned them about, was that they were not the only ones calling this garden home. On their very first night, as the wind whispered through the trees and the new house creaked, like an old ship settling into harbour, Martha was awakened by a sound, a soft thud, a rustle. Peering through the kitchen window, she saw them, two glowing yellow eyes watching from the darkness. Not a raccoon, not a stray cat, something wilder, something that had called this garden home long before the for sale sign went up. His name was Rusty, and he was about to change everything. The Williams' move into their new home was meant to be a peaceful chapter, a slow, golden autumn after a life of hard work. The garden was large but overgrown, the house full of charm but in need of repairs. None of that mattered. What mattered was time. Time together. Time to rest. And time to build new memories with Scout. Scout was a 6-month-old golden retriever, a gift from their daughter just before she left for her new job in another city. For Martha and Robert, he became more than a pet. He was a source of joy, mischief, and companionship, his energy a contrast to the quiet routine of retirement. With a clumsy gait and boundless affection, he brought their house to life. But peace was short-lived. On the very first night, while Robert snored softly upstairs, Martha awoke to an unfamiliar noise, a scraping sound, followed by silence. She tiptoed into the kitchen, flicked on the light, and drew the curtain aside. There, just beyond the glass, a pair of unblinking yellow eyes stared back. They hovered in the shadows like two golden coals. Low to the ground, alert. Not frightened, not aggressive, just watching. Martha froze. The animal didn't move. Its outline was faint, but the pointed ears and thick frame made it unmistakable. A bobcat, wild and poised. She didn't scream. She didn't even wake Robert. Instead, she quietly turned off the light and watched as the creature melted back into the darkness. Later, she would convince herself she'd imagined it. A trick of the light, perhaps. A stray cat with strange eyes. But 3 days later, denial wasn't an option. Robert was out pruning rose bushes by the far end of the garden when the confrontation happened. Scout was sniffing around near the tool shed, tail wagging, ears perked. Then, a growl. Rusty stepped out from behind a tangle of shrubs. His fur was tawny and thick, the muscular build of a predator unmistakable. His body stiffened, ears flat, mouth slightly open, revealing sharp teeth. He didn't charge, but he didn't back away either. Scout, sensing a threat, did what puppies do, he barked. Loud and reckless. In a flash, the bobcat leapt onto the stone wall that divided the garden from the woods beyond. His claws extended, eyes locked on the small, golden intruder. "Good Lord!" Martha screamed, sprinting toward them. Her heart thundered in her chest as she scooped Scout into her arms. She turned her back to the bobcat, shielding the dog as best she could. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Rusty hissed low, turned, and vanished into the trees. That night, Robert double-locked the doors. Martha didn't sleep. The following weeks turned their tranquil retirement into a game of tension. Scout wasn't allowed outside without supervision. Robert installed motion-activated lights along the fence. Martha researched bobcats, trying to understand their behavior, their habits, their triggers. She called the local wildlife authority. The response was sympathetic, but firm. Bobcats, they said, were native to the area and protected. Relocation was only permitted in cases of clear aggression. Unless Rusty attacked, their hands were tied. For Robert, that answer wasn't good enough. He considered hiring a trapper. He even looked into bobcat deterrents, sound machines, motion sprinklers, ultrasonic fences, but nothing felt right. Rusty hadn't attacked. Not truly. He had growled, yes, but what wild animal wouldn't defend its territory? Because, as they would come to learn, that's what this was. Rusty had been living here all along. The property had sat vacant for 2 years. Before the Williams purchased it, no children's laughter, no barking dogs, no human scent. For Rusty, the backyard had become a sanctuary, a quiet hunting ground, a sunlit patch of safety. He had roamed freely, slept beneath the shed, stalked mice near the compost pile. This wasn't just his hunting ground. It was home, and now it had been invaded. The real turning point came one overcast afternoon. Robert was repairing a broken fence post near the far bushes when a rustle made him turn. Rusty stood there, less than 20 feet away. Before Robert could move, the bobcat lunged. Not a full attack, but a defensive swipe. Claws grazed Robert's arm, a shallow gash, not deep enough to need stitches, but enough to leave a scar, enough to haunt them. That night, the house felt different, smaller, threatened. Robert sat at the kitchen table, hand wrapped in gauze, staring into space. Martha made tea she knew neither of them would drink. "We can't live like this," Robert said finally. But the story didn't end there, because the following week, something happened that neither of them could explain. It was raining hard. Thunder rolled over the hills, and the garden turned into a swamp of mud and broken branches. Just after midnight, Martha heard a sound. Soft, rhythmic, not threatening, curious. She found him shivering under the porch, rusty, soaked and hunched, one paw held slightly off the ground. He looked up, eyes dull with exhaustion. Against every instinct, against every piece of advice she had read, Martha opened the shed door. "Go," she whispered, "just for tonight." By morning, he was gone. But inside the shed, on the old workbench, was a field mouse, laid gently, intact. A gift, and that, unexpectedly, quietly, was the beginning. After the night Rusty took shelter in the shed, something shifted, something imperceptible but real. The field mouse left behind was more than a token. It was a gesture, ancient and primal, a predator's way of saying thank you. Martha found it early the next morning, perfectly laid, as if placed with care rather than discarded. She stood there for a moment, the little creature's eyes still open, and for the first time, she didn't feel fear. She felt something else, a strange, cautious respect. Rusty didn't return that day, nor the next. But 3 days later, at exactly noon, he appeared. Not near the house, not even near the shed. He sat at the far edge of the garden, beneath the old walnut tree, watching. Scout saw him first. The puppy didn't bark. He froze, tail low, eyes alert. Martha held her breath, waiting for the growl, the leap, the flash of claws. But it didn't come. Rusty didn't move. He just watched. Then, as silently as he came, he turned and disappeared. The next day, the same thing happened. Noon, walnut tree, Rusty, watching. By the end of the week, it became a ritual. Rusty came every day at the same hour, never crossing an invisible line that seemed to exist between safety and suspicion. Scout no longer barked. Instead, he wagged his tail tentatively. Sometimes he would sit and tilt his head, curious, as if waiting for a signal. One afternoon, Scout made the first move. He bounded out to the garden with his favorite toy, a blue, rubber ball chewed at the edges and punctured in the middle. He carried it in his mouth, tail swishing, and trotted toward the walnut tree. He didn't go far, just halfway. Then, very deliberately, he dropped the ball and sat. Rusty watched from the shadows. Minutes passed. A breeze stirred the leaves. Somewhere, a bird chirped and flew off. Then, slowly, Rusty crept forward. One step, then another. His movements were cautious but not predatory. He paused a few feet from the toy, glanced at Scout, then at the house, and then, incredibly, he reached out a paw and nudged the ball back. Martha, watching through the kitchen window, covered her mouth with both hands. Tears welled in her eyes. From that day on, things changed. Rusty began appearing more often and closer. Not just during midday, but in the morning and late afternoon. He kept his distance, always staying just far enough to avoid alarm. But he no longer fled at the sight of Scout. They began playing, not the way dogs play, not rough or clumsy. It was more like a dance. Chase, pause, circle, repeat. Rusty would run, Scout would follow. Then they'd reverse. Sometimes they'd sit side by side for long stretches, watching birds in the trees as if they had nothing better to do. Robert remained skeptical. "He's still a wild animal," he warned. "Don't forget that." But even Robert couldn't deny what was happening. When spring arrived, he made a decision. It was time to repair the pool. The swimming pool had been a source of frustration since they moved in. Cracked tiles, broken filtration system, and a barrier that had warped with time. Robert got to work, taking it on as his new retirement project. He replaced the tiles one by one, resealed the joints, cleaned out debris that had collected for years. He even installed a new safety barrier, one designed to keep pets and children from falling in. Martha was uneasy. Scout was still young, not a strong swimmer, and curious to a fault. "He could hurt himself," she said. "That's why I'm building the barrier," Robert replied. The new barrier was sturdy, over 1 meter high, with a self-locking gate. But one section, in the far corner of the yard, hadn't yet been reinforced. Robert planned to finish it over the weekend. The job had taken longer than expected, and the forecast promised good weather for a few more days. On Thursday morning, Martha received an unexpected call, the doctor's office. Robert's recent blood tests had come back with abnormal results. Nothing definitive, but concerning enough to warrant immediate follow-up. Panic set in. Martha rushed to get dressed while Robert tried to reassure her, downplaying the urgency. They double-checked the doors, locked the front entrance, and ensured Scout was inside, but in their haste, they missed something critical. The wind from the night before had blown the loose section of the pool, barrier just slightly out of alignment, enough to create a narrow gap. And in her rush to take out the trash before leaving, Martha had not properly shut the back door. It didn't click. It didn't lock. They drove away without noticing. Ta'i, house fell silent. Rusty was sunbathing on the roof of the shed Robert had reinforced for him. his favorite spot during warm days. Scout, meanwhile, stood at the window, watching the car disappear. 20 minutes passed. Then, with the quiet courage of youth, Scout tested the back door. It creaked open just enough. Freedom. The puppy bounded into the garden, tail high, ears flopping, ready for adventure. He darted toward the shed. The Rusty stirred, stretched, and leapt down. The game began again. Chase, circle, dash, roll. The day was unusually hot for April. After half an hour of play, Scout grew tired. His tongue lolled from his mouth. He glanced toward the house, where his water bowl sat just beyond reach. Then his eyes found the pool. The water sparkled, cool, inviting. He approached. Rusty followed, warily. Martha's fears about Scout's curiosity were not unfounded, and Rusty, who had nearly drowned the previous year in a spring flood, had always avoided water. Scout leaned against the unfinished section of the barrier. It gave way slightly, a tiny gap, enough for a determined puppy to slip through. Rusty let out a sound, sharp, warning, urgent, but it was too late. Scout had seen the shimmering blue, and he couldn't resist. The moment Scout slipped through the gap in the pool barrier, everything changed. Rusty, perched just behind him, gave a guttural cry, a warning ripped from instinct rather than language. But Scout was already halfway through. The heat, the thirst, the glistening blue water, all of it was too tempting for a puppy who didn't understand danger. The surface sparkled like a liquid mirror. Scout padded to the edge, lowered his head, and began to lap at the cool water. His tongue flicked eagerly, splashing small ripples across the surface. The pool, freshly cleaned and filled, looked pristine, but beauty can be deceptive. The tile at the edge had become slick from the new filtration system. As Scout leaned further in to drink, his front paws slid out from under him. He tried to correct, scrambling backward, but the glossy surface gave no grip. In an instant, his small body tipped forward, head first into the water. A splash echoed across the empty yard. Scout resurfaced quickly, his head bobbing above the surface. At first, it didn't seem serious. He had been in water before, though always with a flotation vest and the guiding arms of Robert or Martha nearby. He paddled aimlessly, unsure where to go, confusion in his eyes but no fear yet. Rusty raced along the outside of the barrier, circling like a shadow. His yellow eyes never left Scout. His body tensed, ears flat, every movement laced with anxiety. Minutes passed. Scout's excitement waned as fatigue began to set in. His strokes grew slower. The golden fur that once floated like sunlight now clung to his body, waterlogged and heavy. He tried to reach the edge, but the barrier curved too high. The small gap he'd slipped through was now on the other side, far beyond his tired limbs. He swam toward the corner steps, but they too were beyond reach. The panic came slowly at first, then all at once. Scout began thrashing. Paws slapped the surface, eyes wide with alarm. His breathing quickened. He barked, but the sound was strangled, water rushing into his mouth. He gasped and went under for a second, then came up again, coughing violently. Rusty howled. The bobcat's cry sliced through the afternoon air, raw, desperate, and unnatural. He darted back and forth, searching the barrier for a way in. He climbed the fence but couldn't find purchase. He returned to the gap but hesitated, body trembling. Water was Rusty's greatest fear. Even rain sent him hiding. Puddles made him change direction. When Robert washed the car, Rusty disappeared for hours. The memory of the flood that nearly drowned him the previous spring was etched deep into his instincts. Water wasn't just discomfort, it was trauma. But instinct has rivals. One of them is love. Scout was now struggling to stay afloat. His limbs moved slower, less coordinated. Each time he dipped below the surface, he stayed under longer. His mouth gaped, eyes turning glassy. He was drowning. Rusty stood at the gap, paralyzed. Every part of him screamed to run, to stay dry, to stay alive. But friendship whispered something else. Scout sank again, longer this time. When he emerged, his muzzle was barely above water. A soft, broken whimper escaped his mouth, and in that moment, Rusty chose. He bolted through the gap. The Bobcat reached the pool's edge and froze. The water shimmered, alive with reflections, an abyss of fear. He stepped forward, one paw on the slick tile. Then he jumped. The cold was immediate, shocking. Rusty's breath caught in his throat. His fur, so carefully maintained by nature, turned into a sodden weight dragging him downward. He kicked wildly, body spinning once beneath the surface before he found direction. The shock nearly made him turn back. But through stinging eyes, he saw Scout. The puppy's ears floated like petals. His eyes, dull and barely conscious, blinked. Slowly as he drifted, Rusty swam, clumsily, awkwardly, but with a determination no training could teach. Scout saw him. His tail twitched. A spark of recognition lit in his gaze. He tried to paddle toward Rusty, but his body gave out. He began to sink again. Rusty reached him just in time. Scout tried to cling to Rusty's neck. The weight pushed them both underwater. Rusty surfaced, gasping. He shook his head once, then turned toward the steps. Every stroke was a battle. The puppy clung loosely now, too weak to help. Twice, Rusty dipped below, legs kicking in frantic bursts. He pushed forward inch by inch, Scout sliding slightly with each jerk. Then, Rusty did something remarkable. He turned and bit down gently, on Scout's neck, not to harm, but to hold, like a mother cat carrying her kitten. With the grip firm and careful, he kicked harder, driving them toward the shallow end. The steps came into view. Rusty reached the lowest one and shoved upward, lifting Scout out of the water first. The puppy landed with a flop, coughing and shivering. He tried to move but collapsed. Rusty tried to climb next, but his strength was gone. He slid back. Scout, barely conscious, turned his head. With trembling limbs, he reached out and gripped a tuft of Rusty's fur, pulling. It wasn't much. It didn't work. But the gesture was everything. Rusty growled low, as if gathering every ounce of will. He placed one paw on the first step, then another. With a final surge, he hauled himself from the water, and there they lay, side by side, soaked, gasping, shaking, but alive. Scout coughed violently, spraying water across the concrete. Rusty's limbs twitched, his soaked fur clinging to his frame. But neither moved. They had no energy left, only breath, only warmth, and they waited. For what? Neither knew. The sun shifted above them, a breeze passed, and for a while there was only silence. Until, hours later, the sound of tires on gravel signaled someone had come home. The Williams car screeched into the driveway faster than it ever had before. The doctor's appointment, it turned out, had been a false alarm. Robert's test results were the result of a lab error. Relief had poured over them during the visit, but it was short-lived. Something didn't feel right. An unease hung in the air as they drove home. Martha was the first to notice it, the back door ajar, swaying gently in the wind. "Scout," she whispered. Robert didn't wait. He ran through the house and burst into the backyard. His eyes immediately caught the pool. And there they were. Two bodies, motionless, side by side on the concrete. One golden, one tawny. Martha reached them seconds later, dropping to her knees as if the ground had been pulled from beneath her. Scout was breathing, shallow and wet, but steady. Rusty lay beside him, chest rising in slow, trembling waves. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she realized what had happened. Robert didn't need an explanation. He saw the broken section of the pool barrier. He saw the water. He saw the bond. He scooped up Scout and carried him inside, wrapping him in towels. Martha did the same for Rusty, draping a blanket over his soaked frame and gently stroking his fur, whispering his name like a prayer. For an hour, they sat there on the living room floor, drying the animals, speaking little, listening to the sound of shallow breaths and ticking clocks. Scout coughed, expelling the last bits of water from his lungs. Rusty shivered, but his eyes remained open, fixed on the puppy beside him. Later, when both animals were warm and resting, Martha checked the footage from their outdoor security system. The cameras, originally installed to monitor wildlife, had captured everything: Scout slipping through the door, running outside, the joyful reunion, the accident, and then Rusty. Martha clutched Robert's arm as they watched the moment replay. The bobcat pacing, torn between fear and loyalty. The leap into the pool, the swim, the rescue. The screen glowed softly as the scene unfolded again and again. He saved him, Martha whispered. Robert said nothing at first. His eyes were damp. He saved him, and we nearly lost both of them, she added, her voice trembling. Because we didn't finish that barrier. Guilt settled over the room like a heavy fog. That night, Robert didn't sleep. He worked by flashlight, hammering, drilling, and reinforcing every inch of the barrier. He tested each latch 3 times, installed new cameras, and made a silent vow to never leave a margin for error again. By morning, the garden was secure, but something else had changed too. Rusty was no longer a visitor. He had crossed a line, literally and figuratively, that no one could ignore. The bond he had formed with Scout was undeniable. His actions, incomprehensible to the laws of nature, made him something else entirely. He was family, without any formal decision. Martha began feeding Rusty alongside Scout, not separate bowls, not outside, together. Robert installed a small sliding door between the kitchen and the garden, a passage that allowed Rusty to come and go freely. At first, the bobcat remained hesitant. He still slept outside most nights, still disappeared, into the woods now and then. But every evening, without fail, he returned. Scout would be waiting, tail thumping against the floor, eyes gleaming. They became inseparable. They played in the yard like siblings. They napped on the same rug in the living room. Rusty, ever the silent guardian, followed Scout at a distance during their adventures, but was never more than a few steps away. Even Robert softened. He began speaking to Rusty in the same voice he used with Scout, low, calm, occasionally amused. One evening, he opened a can of tuna and placed it on a dish next to the dog bowl. Rusty sniffed it, looked up, and gave what could only be described as a nod of approval. Stormy nights became moments of connection. Thunder once made Scout cower, beneath the bed. Now, Rusty would curl up beside him, his presence a shield. The two would sleep soundly, pressed together, even on the nights when Martha and Robert couldn't. Summer brought new growth. Scout, now nearly a year old, had grown stronger, more agile. Robert taught him to swim properly, this time with gentle encouragement and plenty of safety measures. Each day, they practiced in the pool, Scout paddling confidently as Robert stood waist-deep, offering support and praise. And Rusty, he never entered the water again, but he was always there, perched on the edge, eyes never leaving Scout, body tense, as if ready to act again if needed. Martha started keeping a journal, every detail, every change, every moment of quiet understanding between the two animals was recorded. It became more than a record. It became a way to process something extraordinary. She wrote late into the evenings, seated on the porch, watching them play beneath the oak tree. That fall, as the leaves turned gold and the air grew crisp, the garden felt different. It wasn't just a backyard anymore. It was a space of transformation, a place where boundaries had dissolved. One morning, as the wind carried the scent of pine and earth, Martha looked out the window and saw something that made her pause. Rusty and Scout lay under the tree side by side, Rusty licked Scout's ear once, tenderly, like a ritual. Scout leaned in, his head resting on the bobcat's flank. The moment was still, sacred. Martha closed her journal and whispered to herself, "This isn't just a story about a dog and a bobcat. It's about what happens when fear gives way to love, when instincts are overpowered by something deeper." And it was just the beginning. 1 year after the rescue, the Williams family held a quiet ceremony in their backyard. They called it Rescue Day. There were no guests, no decorations, no speeches, just Martha, Robert, Scout, and Rusty. The garden had changed in subtle ways, healthier, more lived in, as if it too had exhaled after holding its breath for so long. Scout, now a full-grown golden retriever, raced joyfully across the grass, occasionally glancing over his shoulder to make sure his friend was still there, and Rusty, as wild and untamed as ever, followed with a casual grace, no longer an outsider, no longer a shadow at the edge of the garden. They played like they always had, side by side, as if nothing in the world could separate them. That afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Martha sat on the porch once more, her journal open on her lap. She had been trying to write the final entry for weeks, unsure of how to end a story that still felt so alive. Because the truth was, it hadn't ended, not really. She watched as Rusty lay down beneath the old oak tree. Scout followed, curling up beside him. The bobcat licked the dog's head once, gently, then rested his chin on his paws. A breeze rustled through the leaves above them, golden, light catching in the air like dust from a dream. And finally, the words came. Sometimes we are given moments that change everything. Moments that tear away what we thought we knew about nature, or fear, or even love. Rusty was never supposed to be part of their lives. He was wild, untouchable, a danger. But through courage, his and theirs, they found something far greater than comfort or routine. They found connection. Martha realized then that a true home isn't just where you live. It's where you are understood, where you are accepted, not despite your fears, but because of the ways you've chosen to rise above them. Rusty had once run from puddles. Now he stood guard by the pool. Scout had once barked with instinct. Now he played with trust. And she, a retired teacher who once feared the unknown lurking in her garden, now found joy in the way nature had taught her something no classroom ever could. Love transcends species. Courage breaks instinct, and family isn't chosen by blood, but by loyalty. The porch light flickered on. Robert stepped outside, handing her a mug of warm tea. Together they watched the two animals beneath the tree, their forms glowing in the fading light. "I think we'll need more blankets," Robert said, smiling. Martha nodded. "And maybe another journal." She closed the current one with care and whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "There's more to this story. I can feel it." And indeed, there was. Because sometimes, miracles come softly. Not in thunder, not in lightning, but in the quiet splash of a wild animal entering water, and the quiet love that grows in the space between fear and friendship.